Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geostrategic Podcast. Thank you for watching or listening to the podcast. China has just deployed 42 ships across the world's oceans. But this isn't scientific research. It's preparation for submarine warfare. Hundreds of sensors. Strategic chokepoints. And a silent race for underwater dominance, from Taiwan to Guam to the Malacca Strait. China is quietly building a hidden ocean battlefield, and the implications for the U.S. Navy are enormous. But here's the real question. Is this defensive or preparation for conflict? Before we dive in, like the video, subscribe for more geopolitical analysis, and share this with someone following global security trends. And I want to hear from you. Is China preparing for war or just protecting its interests? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and the best insights will shape future episodes. Let's dive in.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to unpacking this with you today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So to really get to the bottom of that big question, our mission for today's deep dive is to completely break down the latest updates detailing this massive multi-year ocean mapping campaign.
Right, because there's just so much noise out there right now.
Exactly. We want to cut through that noise. For you, the listener, we need to clarify the exact geostrategic implications of this hidden underwater network, because when you really look closely at what is actually happening beneath the surface, it just dramatically alters the whole calculus for global security.
It absolutely does. And the sheer scale of this is really where we have to start. Because to grasp the implications, we need to look at how they're mechanically gathering this intelligence.
Right. It's not a small operation.
No, not at all. We are talking about a highly coordinated effort tracked over, more than 5 years now. It involves a fleet of at least 42 research vessels.
Wow, 42.
Yeah, 42. And this isn't just some exploratory wandering where ships are casting nets and, seeing what they find. It is systematic, relentless, and incredibly precise.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when I was looking at the latest info on the logistics of how these ships operate, it doesn't look like standard oceanography.
No, it really doesn't.
It looks exactly like mowing the lawn, and I mean that literally. They are using parallel track navigation, moving in these tightly spaced, overlapping lines to ensure there are absolutely zero gaps in their data.
Zero gaps, exactly.
They are basically building a flawless, high-resolution 3D model of the ocean floor. We are talking about mapping every single ridge, every slope across millions of square miles. But here is the friction point I keep bumping into.
What's that?
Well, officially, a lot of these missions are flagged as civilian climate studies or deep-sea sampling. So I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. My commercial fishminder can map the bottom of a lake, right?
Right.
So how do we know for sure this is a massive military operation and not just an aggressive scientific endeavor?
Well, what's fascinating here is the dual-use nature of this entire campaign. That is really the key to understanding the strategy.
Dual use meaning civilian and military.
Yes, exactly. In China, the integration of civilian scientific activity with military applications isn't just like a convenient synergy. It is a mandatory directive.
Oh, wow. Mandatory.
Yeah, it's called civil-military fusion. The exact same data collected for a university's climate change study is the exact same data required to safely and silently navigate a nuclear-powered submarine.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the latest intelligence indicates that out of those 42 vessels, at least 8 are dedicated strictly to military seabed mapping.
8 purely military ones.
Right. And 10 others are heavily equipped with advanced military-grade mapping systems. The capability isn't isolated, it's distributed across their entire maritime fleet.
So they're essentially crowdsourcing military intelligence through civilian platforms.
That's a great way to put it.
And there is one ship in particular that really caught my eye in the latest updates, which perfectly illustrates this overlap. The Dongfang Hong 3.
Ah, yes. That is the perfect case study. The Dongfang Hong 3 is officially classified as a general-purpose scientific research vessel.
Right, doing biology and geology, supposedly.
Supposedly. Yet if we track its movements between 2024 and 2025, it conducted repeated, highly specific survey missions in 3 major operational zones.
And those zones are not random.
Not at all. We're talking about the waters immediately surrounding Taiwan, the vicinity of Guam, and highly strategic areas of the Indian Ocean.
Right, but I really want to push on that. It wasn't just sailing around mapping the dirt in those areas. The latest info shows a very specific pattern of behavior.
It does.
Like in October 2024, this exact same ship physically inspected seabed sensor systems near Japan. And these aren't weather sensors, right?
No, they're acoustic sensors capable of detecting underwater objects. Submarines.
Exactly. Then it returned to that exact same spot in May 2025.
Which is highly significant from a mechanical standpoint. When you leave a sensitive piece of electronics at the bottom of the ocean for 7 months, things happen.
Like what? Rust.
Well, you have biofouling, so marine life growing on the sensors, you have battery degradation, and most importantly, you have data storage limits.
Ah, right. They run out of hard drive space.
Yeah. It's exactly. Returning in May suggests they were either recalibrating the acoustic equipment for seasonal changes, or they were retrieving data drives that had been quietly recording acoustic signatures all winter.
And right before that retrieval, in March 2025, the latest info shows it was running those dense, overlapping lawnmower tracks between Sri Lanka and Indonesia.
Yes. And if you look at a map, that corridor between Sri Lanka and Indonesia is the direct, unavoidable approach to the Malacca Strait.
A massive maritime choke point.
One of the most critical on the planet. The fact that this vessel repeatedly returns to these contested regions proves this isn't random science. It is systematic operational preparation.
So they're building a layered system.
Exactly. Fixed seabed sensors on the bottom, moored buoys in the water column, and continuous vessel-based surveys updating the data from the surface.
Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit counterintuitive because, mapping the ridges and trenches makes total sense to me. If you are a submarine commander, you want to know exactly where the underwater mountains are so you can hide your multi-billion-dollar boat behind them. It's like a tank hiding behind a hill.
Physical barrier, yeah.
But the latest info shows they aren't just looking at the physical dirt on the bottom. They are obsessively, continuously measuring the water itself.
They are.
They are logging the temperature, the salinity, the ambient pressure, and the current patterns. They are deploying massive subsea arrays just to monitor the water makeup 247, which completely begs the question, how does knowing the saltiness of the water help you fight a submarine?
It all comes down to the brutal physics of acoustic warfare. We have to remember that underwater, radar doesn't work. GPS doesn't work.
Light barely penetrates past a few hundred feet either.
Exactly. Sound propagation dictates absolutely everything. You only have sonar, and unlike a laser beam, sound waves do not travel in a straight, predictable line through the ocean.
They bend.
They do. They are heavily influenced by the density of the water they are traveling through. And water density is controlled by 3 things: temperature, pressure, and salinity.
So if the water gets colder or saltier, the sound wave physically changes direction.
Precisely. When you have variations in these parameters, say a layer of warm water sitting on top of freezing deep ocean water, it creates a boundary. We call these thermoclines.
Thermoclines, okay.
Yeah, these are distinct layers in the water column that act like physical barriers to sound. When a sonar ping hits a thermocline, it doesn't just pass through. It can physically refract, bending away, or the layer can completely absorb the sound wave, killing it instantly.
So the ocean water itself essentially acts like a giant funhouse mirror for sound. Depending on where you are standing or swimming, I guess the reflection is totally warped.
That is a brilliant way to picture it. It is a funhouse mirror. And this dynamic, constantly shifting data allows the Chinese military to mathematically model what we call acoustic shadow zones.
Acoustic shadow zones, so hiding spots.
Exactly. Let's look at evasion first. If you are a submarine commander trying to avoid detection, and you have real-time data telling you exactly where these thermal layers are today, you can dive your submarine just below that thermocline.
Wow.
You position yourself perfectly within a shadow zone. An enemy destroyer on the surface can ping their active sonar all day long, but those sound waves will bounce off the thermal layer and completely miss you. You become practically invisible.
But that goes both ways, right? It's not just about hiding.
Exactly. On the flip side, we have detection. If you are hunting an enemy submarine and you know the exact local acoustic conditions, say, the precise temperature and salinity on a given Tuesday in a specific trench near Taiwan, you can perfectly calibrate your own sonar systems.
Because you know exactly how the funhouse mirror is bent.
Exactly. You know how much it's warping the sound, so you can calculate the distortion and see clearly.
It totally eliminates the guesswork. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a U.S. submarine commander here. Historically, you rely on the vastness of the ocean to hide.
Right, the silent service.
But without that location-specific data, your sonar's detection range might vary wildly from day to day. You might look at your screens and think you have a clear picture for 20 miles in every direction.
When you really don't.
Exactly. Because there was a slight shift in the salt and temperature overnight, your sonar is actually hitting a wall at 5 miles. You are blind, and you don't even know it. By measuring the water continuously, that uncertainty vanishes for the side with the data.
It does. And this is why the mowing the lawn analogy is so vital. The ocean is not static. A mountain on land stays in one place. But underwater, the terrain is the water itself, and it changes with the seasons, the currents, and the weather.
Which means you have to keep updating the map.
Exactly. They have to keep returning to these spots to remap the water. They are moving from generalized ocean knowledge to location-specific, real-time environmental precision.
That's a huge advantage.
It is. And they are doing this in the exact geographical areas where submarines must operate within a few hundred meters of the surface. That is the layer where these environmental factors are the most volatile and thus most crucial for concealment.
So what does this all mean for the global balance of power? I mean, if they have the ships and they understand the physics of the water and they are building this master acoustic map of the world's oceans, where exactly are they placing the pins on that map?
Right.
If I'm looking at a globe, where is this trap being set?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the geography tells the entire geostrategic story. The fixed sensor networks and the intensive mapping tracks are placed exactly along major U.S. naval transit routes and military facilities. First, we are looking at the first island chain.
For those of you who might not have a map right in front of them, paint a picture of that. What exactly is the first island chain?
Imagine a massive geographical wall off the eastern coast of Asia. It stretches from the Japanese archipelago in the north, down through Taiwan, and into the northern Philippines.
Okay, so a natural barrier.
Yes. It is the first line of defense, a natural barrier that any Chinese vessel must cross to access the deep, open waters of the Pacific. And conversely, it's the barrier the U.S. Navy must penetrate to operate close to the Asian mainland.
Got it.
The latest updates show China is heavily mapping and placing sensors right at the gaps in this wall.
So they are basically rigging the doorways.
Exactly, but it goes beyond that. They are mapping the waters east of the Philippines right up to the vicinity of Guam, which is the cornerstone of U.S. power projection in the Pacific.
Right.
They are mapping around Hawaii and Wake Atoll.
That is staggering. That is essentially the entire operational footprint of the U.S. Navy's Pacific presence. They are mapping the water right in our backyard.
They are. But the latest intelligence shows it is not just Pacific focused. This is a truly global campaign. The mapping operations extend all the way down to the 90 East Ridge in the Indian Ocean.
Which is a massive underwater mountain range, right?
Exactly. One that dictates how submarines can maneuver in that hemisphere. They are also intensively surveying the Malacca Strait, which we mentioned earlier.
The economic jugular vein for much of Asia.
Yes, it handles a massive percentage of global energy flows. And they're even pushing up into the Arctic waters west and north of Alaska.
The Arctic? Wow.
They are anticipating future operational areas, betting that as climate change opens new maritime routes over the pole, submarines will follow.
I want to talk about how this actually functions as a weapon system, because knowing the terrain is one thing, but how does a fixed sensor on the bottom of a Malacca Strait actually communicate with a Chinese submarine to, spring the trap?
It requires an incredibly complex data loop. You have the fixed seabed sensors, which are passively listening for the unique acoustic signatures of passing submarines.
Okay.
When a U.S. sub passes over, the sensor records it. That sensor can then use acoustic modems, basically underwater sound pulses, to transmit that data up to a moored buoy floating near the surface.
Like an underwater Wi-Fi relay?
Essentially, yeah. The buoy then relays the data via satellite back to Naval Command. Command then synthesizes that tracking data with the highly precise 3D maps and thermal layer data they've collected and transmits a complete, real-time tactical picture directly to their own submarines.
So they're essentially prepping the battlefield on a global scale. It's not just a map, it's a live feed nervous system for the ocean.
Yes, and this persistent, layered surveillance network acts as a massive force multiplier. And they need that multiplier because according to the latest projections, the Chinese submarine fleet is expected to reach 80 units by 2035.
80 units. That is a massive armada.
It is. But here is the critical insight. They aren't just building more ship to throw into the ocean. They are actively tailoring the physical and acoustic environment to match their exact fleet capabilities.
By knowing the constraints of the terrain.
Exactly. By mapping out the transit routes based on terrain constraints, they know exactly where an Allied submarine is physically forced to travel. They know where the shadow zones are, so they know exactly where to place their fixed listening devices and where to position their own submarines to catch U.S. or Allied vessels moving through those choke points.
Man, it is a complete paradigm shift for naval warfare. I mean, for decades, the U.S. Navy has relied on the stealth of its submarines. We always had the quieter boats, the better technology, and the element of surprise.
We did.
But the era of generalized ocean knowledge is officially over. We are entering an era of continuous, data-driven undersea activity. What China is doing is essentially digitizing the home field advantage.
That's exactly what it is.
By mapping the ocean floor, logging the thermal layers, and wiring the choke points with sensors, they can digitally export that home field advantage anywhere in the world, from the narrow shipping lanes of the Malacca Strait to the freezing depths of the Arctic Circle. They aren't just sailing through the water, they are weaponizing the environment itself.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, to really sit with.
Yeah.
Since the invention of the submarine, they have been known as the silent service. Their entire strategic value relies on the fact that the ocean is dark, vast, and opaque.
Right.
But if the world's oceans are being perfectly mapped, if every acoustic shadow, every temperature fluctuation, and every seabed ridge is continuously monitored by an ever-expanding web of persistent sensors, does the era of the silent service eventually come to an end?
That's heavy.
If the oceans become completely transparent to data, can any submarine, no matter how advanced or how quiet, truly stay hidden?
That is an incredibly chilling thought to leave on. The ultimate stealth weapon suddenly left with nowhere to hide because the enemy mapped the shadows. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this deep dive. Whether you're listening or watching, I hope this gave you a much clearer picture of the silent race happening beneath the waves. If you want to keep exploring the shifting dynamics of global security, be sure to check out the other geostrategic podcasts on our channel. Until next time, keep questioning what's beneath the surface. See you in the next one.